Was Jesus Christ the Son of God, and did all the supernatural events described in the Bible actually happen? If not, then were the supernatural events written about the results of people's hallucinations, or of simply being mistaken? There are scores and scores of supernatural events mentioned in the New Testament. Could it be the case the witnesses were correct, or hallucinating, or mistaken about all of these? Or is it more likely the case that the accounts are simply stories that have been made up? Untruths, or to be blunt, plain old lies. And if they were just stories, who made up these tales, who told these lies? In this short video, we'll try to answer all of these questions using probability. The first thing to admit is that we are looking at this from a naturalist's point of view. That means we are only looking for natural explanations. So let's get started by looking at the first question in this process. Did all these supernatural events happen or not? And our answer has to be in the negative. No, they did not. In other words, the Jesus Christ story as narrated in the New Testament is false. Because a natural explanation is always better than a supernatural one, especially since it hasn't been proven that the supernatural is a real thing. So then, we move on to the second question, were the accounts deliberately written as stories to convince people that they were true, or were people somehow misled, mistaken, about what they saw? To make a decision on this one, we need to consider that there are many, many supernatural events described in the New Testament. It's not just one or two. So if people were somehow genuinely mistaken, they would have had to be mistaken or hallucinating every single time on the scores and scores of superhuman and supernatural events described. That seems a lot less likely. I can grant that people may have been hallucinating or mistaken a few times, maybe 2 or 3, but not hundreds of times, given all the incredible stories in the New Testament. It seems more probable, therefore, that the accounts of Jesus were simply made up, especially when we have examples from ancient mythology of other gods doing similar things. I've mentioned some of these in my video about syncretism and the Roman god factory. So for this question, we have to choose the option that the stories were deliberately made up. Now on to the final question. Who was it that made up these stories? Who should be in the shortlist? The New Testament describes Jesus and his ministry in the Judea region. Who was resident in the Judea region at the time that the Jesus story is set, and at the time when we think most of the New Testament was written? Which is after 70 CE. There are 2 candidates which come to mind. First of all, the Jews themselves. And then the people that had come into the region and had made Judea part of their empire. That is to say, the Romans. Okay, now, who was more likely to have created Jesus? Could it be the Jews, or could it be the Romans? To answer this question, we have to look at the motives of each of the candidates. This will be covered in more detail in another video, but in summary, we know that the Jews weren't compliant, obedient subjects of the Roman Empire, and we know they regularly fought with the Romans. Given that Jesus appears to be a pacifist, and also advises slaves to obey their masters, and subjects to obey the authorities, the verdict leans towards the Romans as being responsible. Because the characteristics and preachments of Jesus favor Roman hegemony in the region. Great, using this method, we concluded that the Jesus story is false, that it was made up deliberately, and that the Romans were behind it. Does that mean we've reached our conclusion, and we can now all go home? Not at all. Our work is not done. All that we've done is conjectured that the Romans were behind it, based on probability. That's hardly conclusive. If we treat the Jesus story as a crime scene investigation, we need to provide more convincing evidence and argumentation. Typically, in a crime investigation, the authorities first of all establish that a crime has been committed. Then they have various techniques to find evidence, and when it comes to identifying the perpetrator, they look at motive, means and opportunity. In my previous video covering syncretism and the Roman god factory, we looked at the Romans' ability and propensity to use syncretism and incorporate the foreign gods of the subject peoples of the empire into the Romans' own pantheon of gods. We also have a notion that the Romans had some interest in creating a pacifistic Jewish Messiah. I intend to cover this in much more detail in a future video. And we know that the Romans had the opportunity because they were in Judea from the 1st century BCE. In fact, that region was part of the Roman Empire for around 8 or 9 centuries in total. So although not covered in detail in this video, we have reason to believe that the Romans had the motive, the means, and the opportunity. A more exhaustive video will cover the motive aspect in the future. All we need to do now is to find the evidence. It would be ideal if we can find that evidence directly in the New Testament itself. If we can do that, we can show beyond reasonable doubt that the Romans were indeed the authors of the Jesus story and demonstrate exactly why they created Jesus. That's all for today. We hope this video has been thought-provoking. If you enjoyed it, please give a like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.